In these sections, I will talk about what is a literature review and why this is needed, types of literature review, what is the process of literature review, how to find and manage the literature, how to do a good literature reviews. First, what is a literature review and why it is needed? A literature review is an account of what has been published on a topic by accredited scholars and researchers. Try to be selective in choosing what you review. Unless your study requires, try not to include materials from newspapers and social media such as Facebook and Twitter because most of them are not written by scholars. A good literature review can help us to achieve these things in research. Bring clarity and focus to the research topic because you need to distinguish what has been done from what needs to be done more. Review important theories and variables in your research areas. Identify relationships between idea and practice, like what the theory are and how the theory are used to inform the practice. The second role is to identify research gap. In a literature review, you will have to introduce your research questions and explain why the questions are important. You can also contextualize your research projects. Tell the readers or examiner what type of similar projects other researchers have conducted. Finally, in a literature review, you can explain the methodology and research techniques you are going to use in your studies. It is good to start with some common mistakes so we can avoid. The first areas relates to writing and structure issues. Students include a lot of information in the literature review, but they do not frame this information under different issues or debates and do not summarize and synthesize the information. Therefore, there is no linking of each study or paragraphs, no clear structure, and no major issue or debates. Too many direct quotations and inconsistent style. Please check which citation styles your department or faculty advise you to follow and get familiar with that style early. The second area of common mistakes relates to the source. For example, no recent and important studies because students could not find them during the search. Irrelevant literature. It sounds weird to include literature that are irrelevant to your studies, but it is very common because during our literature review process, we learn a lot and we keep improving and changing our research questions. Sometimes we are too familiar with our writing and forget to remove the literature that are no longer relevant. Some literature review only include sources that validate your assumptions and do not include contrary findings. I would say it depends on the purpose of your literature review. If the literature review is a course assignment, it may be okay. But if the literature review is part of a PhD thesis, this is going to be a problem. Not keeping enough bibliographical information. There are bibliographical management tools to help with this. You can learn some ways to avoid making these mistakes in these workshops. And this mistakes slide will appear later again. Types of literature review. There are different types of literature review. It can be part of a larger work, such as an introduction sections in a journal article or a chapter in a thesis. Literature review can be a standalone work, such as a course assignment or a review article published in a journal. I'm going to give you some example. This is an example of a PhD thesis from the education faculty. The student used knowledge building theory in his thesis. Of course, he needs to review this theory, but he also needs to set the stage by reviewing other important theory in education, such as Vygotsky, Piaget, and situated cognition. This is an example of a journal article. The literature review starts from the introduction section. After the introduction, there are two sections explaining the key concept used in the article, such as epistemic belief and their development, and epistemic belief and informal reasoning. The literature review sections explain everything you need to know, the objective, everything you need to understand, the objective of this study. Because journal articles have a very strict word limit, authors need to focus on reviewing the concept used to frame the study and explain the finding. This is an example of a standalone review article. The data of this article include 225 studies. The focus is on the classroom dialogues in primary and secondary school classroom. In a standalone review article, the author needs to make the search process very transparent and explain the criteria they use to identify the 225 studies being reviewed in the review article. If you can find a review article that is very relevant to your research topic, please read it, especially the reference list. What is the process of literature review? I think understand the literature review process is important because when you are a student, you might not have a deep understanding of your field, but you need to write a rather comprehensive literature review on your research topic. It means you need to write something that you don't even understand yourself. If we know the literature review process, when we get stuck and get lost, we still know the key step to guide us to make some progress. So we don't need to be like this guy. He has nothing to write about and start with the acknowledgement section instead. The literature review process is adapted from Machi and McIvy. It involves 6 steps. There are 2 things I want to highlight before going into the details. First, do not expect we can start writing immediately. There are many preparations we need to do. Second, these steps are iterative, which means we always need to go back and repeat some of the steps. For example, after I survey the literature, in step 4, I learn more about my topic. So I reformulate my research questions and make them more specific. I need to go back to revise my topic, and I need to conduct the search again. Please do not feel bad if you need to repeat some of the steps. First is to select a topic that involves recognizing and defining the research problem. The target is to have a well-defined statement to direct our search. You can always refine your problem when you learn more about the literature. Here show an initial topic. To what degree do standardized test scores predict actual student achievement? We can look for and think about the subject, verbs, and objects and to make them more specific. Then the refined topic becomes to what degree are the state's standardized test score in language arts. Here we define what the standardized test score refers to. Predictive to individual student success. Here we specify the unit, which is an individual student, not a class as a whole. In college placement with regard to Subject X exam, here we define what achievement means. By making the topic more specific, we can refine the scope of our research. The second step is develop the arguments. The goal is to create a logical process for solving the research problem. We need to present our case by arranging our claims, building evidence, organizing the relevant data, and explaining what is known about the topic. For example, the statement is participatory leadership is the most effective style for leading a 21st century organization. We need to think about the claims, arguments, evidence, and data. In the literature review, at least we need to include what are the major theories on leadership styles, what are the findings from the empirical studies on leadership style, and what are the characteristics of a 21st century organizations. These questions can guide us to conduct the literature search. The third step is searching the literature. It covers how to find and manage the literature. The step 3 is searching the literature, but not only searching. We need to collect, preview, select, and organize information. To start with, we need to define the scope, such as we need to know what are the subject area, keywords, terms, and phrases, parameter, such as inclusion and exclusion criteria, and the key study and the most famous scholar in the field. Here is an inverted triangle. It may help us to adjust the scope of our research. It really depends on your research topic. If you do something very popular, you can find a lot of relevant literature. So you can be very selective and only use the study that are the most relevant and directly relate to your study. But if you are working on something quite new, you might have difficulty to find a lot of relevant studies. You might broaden your scope to use studies that are related to or overlap with your study. Here I want to show an example of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. The keywords here are child abuse and neglect. And we do not distinguish the type of abuse and neglect. For the inclusion criteria, it is about what we want to do. We might be able to tell right away. For example, evaluations of programs to prevent child abuse and neglect, conduct from this time period. Family-based program focus simultaneously on parents and children. For the exclusion criteria, you might not be able to develop them at the beginning. You might conduct a literature search and review the abstract of the papers. Only the abstract is enough. After you read a bunch of abstracts, you should be able to tell what you don't want to include in your literature review. For example, here the exclusion criteria are students aiming to predict the causes and consequences of abuse or neglect. This type of study normally use large-scale questionnaire survey rather than developing and evaluating the effectiveness of a program. So we do not want them. Evaluating the programs to treat child abuse and neglect. We want to prevent, not treat, so we don't want them. And we also do not want essays or methodological studies only. We can plan the sources to be searched. It depends on what stage you are in. If you want a background information search, you may use an encyclopedia, textbook, or our library search. Then you will find some relevant vocabularies, concepts, keywords, and author names. If you want to have a focused topic search and analyze your information needs, you may ask your supervisor to recommend some readings for you. I think it is wise to read your supervisor's work and the reference list because you might want to read what they read. You might consult our subject librarians by filling in this form, consultation request form. Let me show you this one. And our librarian with subject domain will contact you and arrange a one-to-one consultation for you. You may also consult our subject guides. Let me show you our guides. For example, I am interested in early childhood education. I can find a lot of useful information here. For example, journal lists, and also recommended database in the early childhood education. If you are ready to conduct a detailed search, you may search databases. Here, you can find databases by subjects in our library search. Go to the library homepage and switch to e-resources and database by title. I can filter the subject as well. Let me go back to the top. For example, I'm interested in education. Then I can find databases relevant to education. It is useful to look at the work of other students, especially the thesis written by students share with the same supervisors with you or share the same theory or research problem. And you may refer to our library guide on how to find thesis. You can find thesis from Hong Kong, not only the Chinese University of Hong Kong, but also other UGC-funded university like CTU, Baptist U, etc. You can also find theses from China and overseas as well. You might also find journal lists by subject in Journal Citation Reports and SCImago Journal Rank. Now I quickly show you the interface of Journal Citation Reports. Let me show you how to find this one. Go to the library search because this is e-resources, so we select e-resources and input the name, journal citation report, and click the first result. An error, it doesn't matter. Yeah, you should not need to log in, but anyway, here is the interface, and I can click browse by journals. And then select expand the categories, and you will find a lot of different subjects. And I am interested in, again, education and educational research. And there are some other search criteria as well. But in my case, I just want to see the complete list. I click submit. Then I can find a list of journals ranked by their journal impact factor. I would say I would be the most interested in the journals my supervisors and their collaborator publish their research to. The link are embedded in the slide, and I will send the slide to you later. And if you want to learn how to use journal citation reports and SCImago journal rank, you might register and other workshops on 14 October. Let me show you. The workshops on citation analysis tools for ranking journals. In these workshops, we will cover how to use journal citation reports and the SCImago database as well. If you already identify a few studies that are very relevant to your studies, you might conduct citation search to track more work related to your research studies. You might use Web of Science, Scopus, and Google Scholar to do the tracking. For example, I go to Web of Science. Let me change the interface to English. And I do a title search. Just find one example. I can go to Inside. I can look at its cited references at the bottom. This is the reference list of this article, and we can also find the time cited, like how many others' work have been cited to these particular articles. And we can also look at the time cited here. So I can track what other studies have cited this article by clicking the time cited. A little bit confusing. I explain it again. The cited references below is the reference list. By looking at the reference list, you know what other article this particular article refer to. And this time cited means what other work have referred to this particular article. And if you want to learn how to use this citation database, like Web of Science, Scopus, and Google Scholar, You might attend our and other workshops. Let me show you. How to measure impacts of research paper is on 6th October. Many students do not commit plagiarism in purpose. They simply do not manage the source of their references when they read, so they cannot acknowledge the source properly when they write. I highly recommend you to use one of these bibliographic management software. You may refer to the library guides here. The library periodically runs workshops to teach this software as well. I personally recommend EndNote. The library also offers guides on using information responsibly for your assignments and also on citation style. Please check with your department which citation style you need to follow. Here show an example of my EndNote library. When you download a full text of an article, you can also download the citation file of that article and import the full text as well as the citation file to EndNote. I import the citation file here, and I also attach the full text to each record. If I double-click one of these items, I can edit the citation information and write my research notes here. I can open the full text by double-click the PDF file. Every time, I can work on the same file so that I can make annotation on the files. The following steps relate to doing a good literature review. Step 4 is survey the literature. In this step, we assemble, organize, and analyze the literature. Do not read the whole article or book at this step. We only need to get an overview and identify the things that are most useful for us. For books, we read the introduction and table of content to identify key chapters, ideas, aims, and logic. For article, let me show you an example. We read the abstract, introduction, and the last paragraph before the methodology sections. This usually is the objective of the study. And we might also note the heading and subheading of the article, so we know the structure of the article. Make a tentative classification to group different articles together, and we can always revise it later when we have a better understanding on the literature. Please take note when you are reading the article, like describe the main point, methodology, finding, and more importantly, write down the details that are relevant to your study. If you do not write down this detail, you will forget them. Trust me. When take notes, use consistent formats and keep enough detail to note the differences and similarities across studies, because at the end of the day, we will have to summarize and synthesize the idea from different studies. And build table to summarize the literature if possible. This is especially useful if we conduct quantitative studies. You might create a table to explain the definitions of different variables and what are the studies you refer to when defining the variables. The table can be included in your literature review chapter. This is my EndNote library. Again, I create different folders to group the article meaningfully to help my literature review. I can easily change the folder name, add and remove articles from different folders. There are different ways to organize a literature review. Chronological is a timeline approach. For example, these studies review the development of building regulation in the historical context. It groups different studies under different themes, and the themes are presented chronologically. We may organize a literature review thematically around different topic or theme. For example, this student explained knowledge management theory and practice, how ICT used in knowledge management, and issue and concern for effective knowledge management. This student organized the literature around different theory and debates. As you can see, there are lots of lism. The student review them one by one. This is my thesis. I review how other researchers analyze online discussion. So I review different analytical approach one by one. The step 5 is critique the literature. In step 4, in the previous step, we only get an overview of different study. But in this step, we need to read carefully. We need to find the research gap, contradiction, omissions, and major debates, so we can define a new and important research questions. When we critique the literature, please look for methodological strengths and weaknesses, such as the units of analysis, sampling strategies, types of data, and the analytical approaches. Remember to distinguish between idea and evidence. You may want to use evidence to support your ideas. Note the major weaknesses across groups of studies. If a lot of studies share similar weaknesses, there should be some valid reasons, and please try to understand the reason. When your study also has this weakness, you may point it out and tell your examiner how you manage it. Finally, the final step is to write the literature review. Here is the structure of literature review. We have introduction, body, and conclusion. The introduction sections is very difficult to write, but once you make it, you will have a better idea of the overall organizations of your literature review. People usually force themselves to write this one first. After writing the body and conclusion, people go back to revise and refine the introduction part. Here is some of the tips on writing. We will notes written throughout the literature review process. Write an outline to guide your writing. Provide an overview near the beginning of a section. Provide a topic sentence to specify your view in the first sentence of a long paragraph. Summarize periodically to recap the key idea for your reader. Use subheadings in long review to guide the readers. Evaluate your reference list for currency and coverage, especially for PhD students. You may conduct the search at the first years of study. You may add recent study at the fourth year of your PhD study. It is a final reminder. You may keep a journal to document the search strategies, terms, keywords, and sources, so you won't repeat the same search again and again. Document the development of your research topic. It is to keep track on the changes of your research problem, so you know how your ideas are improved over time. Also documents the review process. During the reading and writing process, you will have a lot of insights, observations, questions, and reflections. If you do not write them down immediately, you will forget them. And these insights can help you to find new ideas and patterns. When to do a literature review, please do not procrastinate. People tend to put things off when they have a lot to do. We need to do the literature review before, during, and after the research. Writing is rewriting. Be prepared, your supervisors will ask you to keep rewriting your writing. And please do not feel bad. We are all doing the same. And this is the reference list. And thank you so much.